I don't know.
Say it with me. I don't know.
Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
We're so compelled to reach for the certainty and the comfort of that, and I find myself doing it all the time. Just, they talk about buildings have to, if you build a really tall building, it has to slightly be able to move, otherwise the wind will push it down. But rigidity is what, and we're always almost fossilizing, like the idea you've had it long enough, it becomes part of your identity, and then it's hard and it becomes vulnerable again, and because it's too rigid and you have to just push it over. But that's hard work. I know it's the work of being a human being, but it's hard work.
Welcome everyone to episode 160 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Dr. Bob Pondillo and I interview Rebecca Fox. Rebecca is the artist and author of a new graphic novel titled Murmurs of Doubt, 12 skeptical graphic novellas. She's British and was raised by apatheist parents, but got caught up in the Wiccan religion in her teens. Rebecca is an impressive, sharp communicator with an interesting personal journey that we're delighted to bring you. On her website about the book, Rebecca writes, quote, "I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, and neither are you. I wanted to write stories about those moments of epiphany when we begin to change, to see through superstition and dogma, and get a glimpse of the really real world. But that's impossible. The closer I look for those moments, the more slippery they become. And as I wrote and drew, I realized I was telling stories about doubt, bubbling under the surface in everyone's lives, ready to transform us. Murmurs of Doubt is a collection of 12 comics about people from diverse backgrounds and cultures experiencing doubt and becoming someone new." At around the 1-hour mark of this conversation, Rebecca references Leo Igwe's Skeptical Manifesto for Africa, from which I'm about to read. I found this to be a very practical application for atheist activism in the world that pushes back against the toxic effects of non-critical thinking and superstition. It occurred to me as an opportunity for us to apply our heartfelt concerns for how religious thinking is literally arresting social development around the world. You can Google A Skeptic's Manifesto for Africa, which I've linked in the show notes, and donate to this cause. The following excerpt from Igwe's post demonstrates a religious hegemonic stronghold, even greater than that of the American South. Here's an excerpt from his post. Quote, "For too long, African societies have been identified as superstitious, consisting of people who cannot question, reason, or think critically. Dogma and blind faith in divinity and tradition are the mainstay of African popular thought, culture, and mentality. Science, critical thinking, and technological intelligence are portrayed as Western, not universal values, and alien to Africa and to the African mindset. An African who thinks critically or seeks evidence and demands proof for extraordinary claims is thought to be taking a white or Western approach. An African questioning local dogmas and tradition is portrayed as having abandoned or betrayed the essence of African identity. Skepticism and rationalism are regarded as Western, un-African philosophies. Although there's a risk of overgeneralizing, there are clear indicators that the black continent is still socially, politically, and culturally trapped and held back in the past. Many irrational beliefs exist and hold sway across the region. For instance, not too long ago, the police of Nigeria arrested a robber goat, who they said was a thief who suddenly turned into a goat. A Nigerian woman was reported to have given birth to a horse. In Zambia, a local school closed temporarily due to fears of witchcraft. In Uganda, there are claims of demonic attacks in schools across the country. Persecution and murder of alleged witches continue in many parts of the continent. Many Africans still believe that their suffering and misfortune are caused by witchcraft and magic. Ritual killing and sacrifice of albinos and other persons with disabilities take place in many communities. Across Africa, people still believe in the potency and efficacy of juju and charms. Faith-based abuses are perpetrated with impunity. Jihadists, witch hunters, and other religious militants are killing, maiming, and destroying lives and property. Otherworldly visions and dogmatic attitudes to anything divine continue to corrupt and hamper attempts by Africans to improve their lives. Even with the continent's ubiquitous religiosity, many African states are to be found at the bottom of the Human Development Index and at the top of the poverty, mortality, and morbidity indices. Recently, Africa was polled as the most devout region in the world. Devoutness and underdevelopment, poverty, misery, piety coexist and correlate. Incidentally, the dominant faiths in the region are alien faiths. That means African Christians are more devout than Europeans whose missionaries brought Christianity to Africa. African Muslims are more devout than Muslims in the Middle East whose jihadists and clerics introduced Islam to the region. Meanwhile, whatever good those foreign religions must have brought or done in Africa cannot be compared to the damage and darkness they have caused and are still causing in the region. Intellectually, these two religions are holding Africans hostage. Most Africans cannot think or freely express their doubts openly because their religions have placed a huge price on free thinking and critical inquiry. Christianity and Islam peddle too many irrational claims, which reinforce traditional irrational beliefs and encumber efforts to combat superstitions in the region. Africans must reject religious indoctrination and dogmatization in public institutions. Africans need to adopt this cultural motto: dare to think, dare to doubt, dare to question everything in spite of what religions teach or preach. Africans must begin to think freely in order to emancipate themselves from mental slavery and generate ideas that can ignite the flame of enlightenment. The two dominant religions have fantastic rewards for those who cannot think, the intellectually numb and dumb, those who exercise blind faith and unquestioning obedience, even those who kill or are killed, furthering their dogmas. They need to be told that the skeptical goods, the liberating promises of skeptical rationality, are by far more befitting and more beneficent to Africans than imaginary rewards, either in the here and now or in the hereafter. Today, the African continent has become the new battleground for the forces of a dark age, and we have to dislodge and defeat them if Africa is going to emerge, grow, develop, and flourish. To some people, the African predicament appears hopeless. The continent seems to be condemned, doomed, and damned. Africa appears to be in a fix, showing no signs of imminent radical change, transformation, or progress. African enlightenment sounds like a pipe dream. I do not think this is the case. The fact is, there are indeed Africans who reason and think critically. There are Africans who are skeptics and rationalists, but they are too few and far apart to form the critical mass the continent needs to experience a skeptical spring. However, the momentum is building, slowly and steadily. One can say that an African skeptical awakening is in sight. The darkest part of the night often precedes the dawn. There is a reason to be optimistic and hopeful. After all, Europe went through a very dark period in its history. In fact, it was a darker and more horrible phase than that which Africa is currently undergoing. Yet the European continent survived to experience enlightenment and modern civilization. Whoever thought that the Arab Spring would happen in our lifetime? African enlightenment can happen sooner than we expect. But it will not happen as a miracle. African enlightenment will not fall like manna from heaven. It requires hard work, efforts, sacrifice, courage, and struggle by Africans and other friends who are committed to the values of enlightenment. In Europe, skeptics spoke out against dogma and tyranny and caused the dawn of a new awakening. African skeptics need to speak out against the forces of dogma, irrationalism, and superstition ravaging the continent. Skeptics need to organize and mobilize, online and offline, to further the cause of reason, science, and critical thinking. Skeptics can no longer afford to keep quiet or remain indifferent in the face of a looming dark age, because charlatans operate in their communities, mining popular fears and anxieties, exploiting desperate, ignorant, gullible folks. We need to expose them and free our people from their bondage. This is a call to duty to all African skeptics in Africa and in the diaspora. History has thrust on us this critical responsibility which we must fulfill. Let us therefore marshal our will to doubt and other intellectual resources and cause this new dawn, this skeptical awakening to happen early in the 21st century. African skeptics arise." Unquote. So I found this interesting because as much as we here in America have felt the negative repercussions of religion, its destructive swath reaches well past our western borders, with far worse ramifications. I hope you caught the phrase skeptical spring and skeptical awakening. This notion inspired me to keep putting out episodes of this podcast, to keep speaking out about the integrity of critical thinking. Christians have a scripture that propels them out of complacency in Romans 1:16. Quote, "I am not ashamed of the gospel," unquote. Well, they should be ashamed. And we, with the truth and morality and human progress on our side, should not be ashamed. Obviously, I'm not endorsing that we become assholes like them, but that we not shrink back from opportunities to inform the curious, educate the confused, and embolden the cowardly. We taped this conversation on July 15th, 2017. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show's available on most podcast platforms. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyonesagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green, titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was created by the Barry Orchestra at barryorchestra.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
Hello.
Rebecca! Hello, Governor.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you guys?
We're pretty good.
We're good.
Yeah.
The enthusiasm.
Yeah, well, this is how Bob greets everybody. He's over the top.
Well,
I like it.
Yeah, we just want you to know we're here and we're happy to have you. So, I have some questions before we start.
Okay.
You mentioned the rocky coast of New England is where you used to live. I just came back from New England.
Oh, no, and not New England at all.
No? Or did you
South
say
England.
Of South England? Oh, jeez. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I live now in a little coastal town, and it's beautiful, and the big cliffs made of chalk, so very rocky, but probably very different from New England.
Where do you live? We go out there frequently, out to
In Brighton.
Oh, we go out to Cornwall.
Oh, really? I love Cornwall.
Yeah, we go out to Cornwall and Devon and Foy and all those places.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'd love to get down there more often, but it's really hard to get around without a car. I don't drive.
Yeah. Well, but the bus system there is outstanding. Buses and trains, you can get around. It takes you like forever, but you can get there. So it's pretty cool. Well, good to have you, Rebecca. Absolutely.
It's great to be here.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if your publicist contacted me or how we got hooked up originally. Do you remember?
I think he did, yeah. I think Rob, who's my, I don't know what he is. He's my guy,
Your
my
agent.
editor, my publisher, whatever. Yeah, I think he put us in contact. But I actually had listened to your podcast for a while, so I'm familiar with your work. It's amazing. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Oh.
Well, and Bob and I have both read your graphic novel,
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
thank you.
You're very welcome.
and I just love it.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
outstanding.
that's really sweet of you to say.
I had a moment yesterday where we've known you were coming on the show for maybe 6 weeks or something, so I've been skimming it. But yesterday I hit it again just to refresh myself, and I was on the porch and I had some music going, and I think it was Andre Bocelli or something. It was just very moving music, and there was something about the moment where I was reading these stories, and they're very they're gripping. They're
Twilight Zone-y.
well, and they're sobering. Like the two that I read were that I read yesterday that I want to talk about. But I was on the verge of tears.
Oh. I
Gives,
suppose that's good.
no, it was good. Well, and we'll get into the details of the book and such. But first, let's talk about your religious background and if you've had any kind of deconstruction of your faith, or what happened for you.
What did you grow up in? What faith tradition?
None at all. My parents are both atheists. Well, not atheists as in like strident atheists, just cultural atheists. They're not Christian. They're not anything.
Yeah, apatheists.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great word. So they didn't give me any kind of religious background, and to be honest, not that much sort of even instruction at all. I sort of had free reign to experiment with things, which was good and bad, because it would have been nice to have a little critical thinking education thrown in as a kid.
Yeah.
So I guess when I was 10 years old, my mum left, which obviously was a big, weird thing to happen in a young woman's life. And I was kind of destabilized by that. And I started thinking, I was going to the library and picking up books about like werewolves and spontaneous human combustion and telekinesis, like all these cool books. And they're in the non-fiction section of the library. So
werewolves?
I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
must be fact, I guess. It's not fiction, must be fact.
Yeah.
So I had those sort of ideas bounce around in my head.
Wow.
And then my dad remarried this woman who was a spiritual healer.
Oh, okay.
And she did, that was her job. She did, I don't know exactly what tradition she worked in, but she basically, it's kind of like Reiki. She held her hands over people and sort of projected energy out.
Yeah.
So she would go to these mind, body, spirit fairs. And we kids, because she had 3 children and I have a brother, so us 5 kids would get dragged along to these things. And we'd just sort of roam around amongst all the stalls, talking to the tarot card readers, looking at all the pretty crystals, just being in that sort of environment.
Wow.
But yeah, it was weird. And especially weird for me and my brother because we were sort of dropped into it.
Yeah.
Whereas her kids were familiar with all this stuff. To them, it was just boring. They would go sit and read, their comic books or go sneak around the back and have a cigarette. But we were like, wow, what is this? So, yeah. And at some point, and I don't know exactly where, I started to talk to people who called themselves witches and found that really, really alluring. And they would tell me all this cool stuff you could do and spells and magic and so I sort of had it in my idea that was something I was really interested in. And then I started going to the library and looking for books on that. And there were loads, just shelves and shelves at my local library of books on Wicca, which is a type of neo-paganism, which is what I ended up getting into. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Wicca.
A little bit. I just came back from Salem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, up in Massachusetts. And yeah, man, they turned that into a profitable business out there. I mean, it's witches on every corner, which places to eat, which museums, and of course the actual, a cemetery, a graveyard of the
Salem witch trials.
Yeah, the Salem witch trials of the. I can't remember how many, 12, 13, 19. Anyway, there was several, more than a dozen people that were either hanged or
burned.
Pressed to death. Yeah. The guy was pressed to death. Yeah.
The burning was more in mainland Europe.
Yeah.
Which is weird because witches refer to those times as the burning times. But as you know, a lot, especially here and in Salem, they were hanged, sorry.
Yes. No, I hear you. It was and you're right. The notion of witchcraft and thou shalt not suffer a witch and what have you, that was in the culture, resident in the culture when the Pilgrims came over here to this country. So it was in Europe, maybe at least a couple hundred years prior to the coming of the Pilgrims. So it was resident. People were worried about supernatural demons and witches and all that stuff. Weird shit, man.
Well, weird and very alluring to a teenage girl.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Very exciting and like cool jewelry and, you get to wear all black. And that was kind of the image that I was attracted to. But then I started digging deeper and actually got into it as a religion. Although, interestingly, like the people, I'm sure maybe you're aware of this if you've been to Salem museums, but the people who were burned in mainland Europe and hanged here and in Salem weren't witches, as in Wiccan people. That's a convenient through line that a lot of Wiccans draw, because it's a nice sort of narrative for us that we're an oppressed people. But that's a bit dubious, to say the least.
Yeah.
So what was the allure for you as far as... I know that, the Wiccans that I have known, they love the connection with nature. They love the being in stride with the cycles of the moon, for example, and things like that.
Yeah, that was a large part of it for me, but that is stressed more in American Wicca than it is in British Wicca. British Wicca is much more like occult, like traditional, like if you think of like the Freemasons and Aleister Crowley, that's the tradition that it comes from. Okay. So, and then later in like the 60s and 70s, it came to America and became much more of like a nature-loving sort of hippie religion and all that beautiful almost pantheistic, whereas British Wicca was more, gods and goddesses and a particular array of tools and certain words you had to say.
So in Great Britain, do they have, black magic? Because here it's all about white magic and doing the right thing and not eating babies and stuff. All the stuff that, people thought witches did, apparently.
Yeah. I think most Wiccans would probably tell you that the magic isn't black or white. It's just like, it's a force. It's like electricity. You could use it to power a chainsaw and like cut people up, or I don't know, an electric toothbrush.
Really?
Yeah.
Weird.
That makes sense.
Weird. Yeah, but I mean, all this, the whole supernatural stuff. I mean, it kind of makes sense. If you're going to have a god, why not have a push against it? Why not have a witch? Why not have a demon?
Or just anything that is captures or puts you in cooperation with the unexplainable. And there's, the meaning-making nature of humans is that, like, just the fact that we're hurling through space and this is pointless and meaningless is just, that's just too much. And then when you do see things that appear magical or appear transcendent, or it's just way too coincidental, there's something going on here.
Right. It's got to be a reason.
We grab onto that like hunger. I mean, like we are hungry for meaning. So when we see anything that slightly, gives our lives meaning, I just think we jump all over it as a species.
Yeah. Plus, it gives you control. It gives you a sense of agency.
It can give you, it can give you a sense of power. I think eventually it robs you of agency because you become a slave to it. But
yeah. Good point.
Yeah, control is a really important word for me when I look back on what I was looking for, because I was a teenager and I felt very out of control and quite frightened by, like my parents were getting together and breaking up with different people and everything was sort of in flux. And I didn't really feel like I had a home. So having something that gave me control and gave me a home and gave me a link in the sort of nature side of things, like gave me a link to the British landscape and made me feel like I was connected to some kind of ancient tradition that accepted me and wanted me and that gave me a context for who I was, that was so important.
Yeah.
In fact, I just recently was attending a conference, and someone mentioned in passing the psychological theory of paranormal belief, which is basically the idea that, and it's an idea that I sort of instinctively came up with when I look at my past, but apparently it's been studied, that people who grow up with a sort of feeling of lack of agency are much more likely statistically to gravitate towards belief systems which give them agency, i.e. spells, paranormal, all those sort of things that make you feel like you can do something, you can control something, because they lack agency, or they perceive that they lack agency as children. It's a really strong correlation. So actually, I felt really really moved when I heard this psychologist reference that just in passing, because I was like, oh, I feel validated. That's what happened to me. It makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I can tell, when your mother leaves and things are kind of upheaval, you feel like life is happening to you.
Yes.
And it's just, you're getting the full brunt of life. And so some way, as far as take the bull by the horns, you find some horns and you grab on and say, this is at least one facet of my life where I can actually control, and I'm not the victim. I'm actually the aggressor, or I'm the doer.
Yeah.
And that's empowering.
Yeah. Horns. It's very apropos.
It is.
Demons
the horned god.
and things. Yeah, absolutely.
So how did that manifest for you? Did you have practices? Did you have disciplines that you did, and where are you now on that journey?
Well, the Wicca that I found was like a compromise between the American Wiccan tradition is very informed by feminism, and so it's very goddess focused, which is cool, and nature worshipping and environmentalism. And the British Wicca is much more structured and formal, as I was saying. So I was reading books from both traditions and sort of syncretized them into one thing, and that's basically what most Wiccans in the UK and in Australia. I've talked to Australia. I actually practiced with a coven in Australia briefly as well. So this is what people do now. It's like a mix between the two outside the US. Maybe the US sticks to the more kind of hippie version. Wow. But we have this mix. So I started reading books, and I found a friend at school who's still one of my closest friends, who was also interested in this sort of thing. And we formed what we call a working partnership, which is someone basically you work magic with, and you bounce your ideas off about magic, and you celebrate the 8 festivals, which are the wheel of the year. Right. And from there, we built up a coven. And this is all like in our late teens, early 20s, and we were practicing regularly. Like traditionally, you celebrate 8 festivals in the year, so you get together for all of those 8, and that's like a big thing. And we used to go out to this amazing place called Cope Hill, which is in the middle of the countryside. We had to walk like an hour out of our little town just into the, I guess it was probably farmland, but there were like bits of scrubby wood in between the farmland, and that's where we found our home. Wow. And it was like, it was this really beautiful space, and we put little candles up, we had bonfires, and it was always like varying amount of people we had. The 2 of us were the high priest and high priestess, so we're static, we're always there.
Very
but then
nice.
we had a bunch of people coming in and out, just celebrating.
Yeah, take us inside that coven. What do you do in a coven? I mean,
okay.
How do you start? I mean, what do you do? Do you invoke the spirits, or do you take off your clothes and jump around the campfire naked, or what?
Well, we were teenagers, so we were too embarrassed to take off our clothes, but we should have done, because that is supposed to be more powerful for magical energy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know, something about it being natural.
Okay.
So first you have to sort of describe a sacred space. So you might put, sometimes we'd get loads of, as we walked up, we'd pick up like flowers and bits of stick and stuff, and then create a sort of circle on the ground in this little clearing of trees where we'd always go. Or we might put candles around, obviously, in jars so that they didn't tip over and set everything on fire. Or a circle of salt is very traditional. So just like mark off, this is our sacred space. This is a space where, like the mundane world doesn't get in.
I get you.
And then you sort of do a ritual, which actually sort of makes a space literally sacred, as well as, makes, I don't know. So it's like almost like there are 2 worlds in which you're operating. Mm-hmm. And we'd often talk about the circle as a space between those 2 worlds. And in many Wiccan traditions, they'll talk about more than 2 worlds, but this is the way we thought of it. It's like the spiritual world and the physical world. Mm-hmm. So you're describing a space in between those 2 worlds where you can call on the powers of both. And so you often call the four corners, as in the points of the compass, which are aligned with different elements. And there's specific ritual words you say about that. And then often dance around to charge up, to make sort of spiritual and also, I guess, physical, energetic power. And then you'd set to whatever the task at hand was. Different festivals have different rituals associated with them, and they're all teed up with the agricultural year. So on the 1st of May, for example, we'd be celebrating new life and new ideas and birth and all that sort of thing. And then at the other side of the wheel of the year, we'd be at Halloween, and we'd be celebrating our ancestors and the endings and a time of introspection and darkness. And then we'd work magic in various ways, depending what different people needed that week. If someone's grandma was ill, or, I don't know, if someone needed help getting a job, we'd do different magical rituals for that. And then we'd close the circle, and then we would feast, which basically meant eating a lot and getting stoned and drunk.
And
I love it.
This space is, like you said, it's about an hour's walk from like wherever you park or whatever. So everybody kind of has to. And do you stay the night, or do you set up tents?
Yeah, we often would. On summer nights, we'd stay the night.
Yeah.
But it gets very, very cold.
Yeah, sure.
As you can imagine, midwinter in the south of England, it's not a good time.
And when you think about it, what's the difference between, my grandma's sick, well, I'll pray for her. What's the difference?
It's really similar. I often think that prayer and magic are very closely related.
Yeah. Or at least everybody's trying to tap into something because they feel helpless.
Yeah.
When your grandmother's sick, I mean, we've talked about it on the show a lot. I mean, we all kind of throw up our hands and I wish I could do something.
Let's pray.
And sometimes that wish drives you to do something, even though it's maybe credulous on your part or something, who knows. But
well, cast a spell on me, would you? I mean, what would you say?
The cool thing, well, not cool, but the interesting thing, looking back on all the sort of magic spells and workings that I did, was they were cleverly chosen to be things that were pretty much unfalsifiable. Wishing someone gets better is kind of vague, so you can say, oh well, she did actually, her cancer got worse after I did that spell, but her spirit, she was so much happier. That's probably how my spell worked.
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah. Christians say that all the time.
Just a load of bullshit. It's just amazing how crazy. Well, prayer, everything, and the casting of spells and all that too.
So, how do you identify now on the religious spectrum?
I'm an atheist, and I'm really proud of being an atheist.
Okay.
Although I do acknowledge that technically I'm agnostic because I don't have knowledge, like none of us do.
Right.
You have enough
I've listened
knowledge.
to your podcast enough to know that, but.
I say, after 2,000 years, you got it.
We got knowledge.
Come on now. There's no God. Give me a break here.
So says the host of the show called Everyone's Agnostic.
Well, that's just me.
I'm serious. We both push back against, because in a way, we are just stating the obvious. And that's what I think the show title is about, is that it's true that no one knows, but we also are claiming to know a lot.
Well, we don't know everything, clearly.
Yeah, that's why it's almost a meaningless statement to say everyone's agnostic, and I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get everybody to the table with a posture of humility. That's all that means.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't
really
have
like
that in this area.
You're more humble than I am.
Well, I don't know.
But so, Rebecca, I'm curious. You just said that you were this co-founder with a person that's still your friend. Is that friend atheist as well now?
Yes, he is. Yeah. Okay. We worked through this sort of stuff together, so we carried on talking about it, and we went on a similar journey with our relationship with Wicca, because we both went traveling. So when I finished university, I went traveling with my now husband for a few years, quite a long time, and I sort of I think there's this term which I really like, detribalized. I became detribalized. I saw other people celebrating religion in different ways, and I lost touch with that cycle of the year, because Wicca is so focused on the 8 festivals. Yeah, and obviously it feels weird when you're in like an equatorial country to be celebrating festivals that don't really work. So I sort of lost that association, and all the time keeping in contact with my old friend, going back and forth, talking about these issues. And then I eventually settled down to study in Australia, and I tried to pick up again there. They flip all the festivals backwards.
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's winter here, but it's summer there. So how do you figure it out? Look how Western centric witchcraft is when you start thinking about it.
Which makes perfect sense, because this is exactly where it was invented, in the 1940s, not at the beginning of time, as some Wiccans will tell you.
Really? Yeah. I didn't know. I thought it comes from like Druid and Celtic traditions or something.
Yes, that is exactly what how the story goes, the sacred history goes.
Is that so? And that's all BS? I didn't know that.
It's not. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's all BS, but basically there was this guy called Gerald Gardner in the 1940s. He'd spent most of his life as a colonialist in Southeast Asia, and he came back and retired in the UK to the New Forest, and he started putting all his ideas together. So he'd been a Mason, he'd studied Eastern philosophy and religion, and he was quite interested in folklore, British folklore. And he started putting all those sort of ideas together. And he was a nudist as well, which is why Wiccans often practice in the nude. So he had all this stuff going on in his head and all these kind of interesting ideas. And he was involved in a lot of societies relating to those different interests. And then, out of the blue, he announces that he has found an ancient remnant of the pre-Christian religion still alive in the New Forest, and he can't tell anyone where they are or who they are or any specifics, but he's found them. You have to trust him on this, and he's been initiated into this Wicca, into this witchcraft, and he will go on to be the father of witchcraft. He initiates lots of other people, initiates high priestesses who go on to start their own covens, and it sort of spreads out from him. He's sort of a nexus.
Oh wow, he didn't have golden plates, did he? He wasn't a Mormon.
No, exactly. It's a very similar character. In many ways, also sort of Scientology, similar to Scientology in some ways as well. But Gerald Gardner, I think, was generally like a nice guy with a bit of a sense of humor, but he was enthusiastic about spreading his new religion, and the only sort of actual archaeologists and people who study ancient religions never took any of his claims seriously, because they're just so wacky, and a lot of the stuff he came up with sounded a lot like occultism and Freemasonry, and it just didn't seem to tee up with what because so little is known about like Neolithic religion. It's just basically a blank, but they didn't tally up. So no one really took him seriously in the academy, but the public loved it. They went crazy for him. And he did interviews, and he was just like, he looked amazing. He had like a little silver goatee and spiky hair, and he was out and like wearing this big cape sort of thing. So he was out and about promoting his new belief system. And he said that he got it all from, as I said, this coven he found in the forest, and particularly that he was initiated by a woman called Old Dorothy, who was like this amazing witch, and she had, during the Second World War, she'd summoned up covens all across the UK and brought them together to create a cone of power, which is like a special spell to stop Hitler coming across the Channel, which obviously worked.
Yes, of course.
So there was this rich mythology about this one particular woman who initiated him, and she was like the link. And more recently, historians have gone back and identified from some clues he left, because he referred to her sometimes as Dorothy Clutterbuck. And there was actually a Dorothy Clutterbuck who lived there, and they found out who she was and went back and looked through her diaries and things. And it turns out it seems incredibly unlikely that she was a witch in any way. She was like a pious Christian lady. She seems perfectly lovely, wrote lots of poetry. And the date when, I can't remember, I think it was like September 1939, Gerald Gardner claimed he was being initiated in her back garden into witchcraft. She was mourning her husband who died recently, and she just commissioned a big cross to go in the graveyard with this really like florid description, really over the top Christian description. So it's possible that she lived this crazy double life, but most historians think more likely Gerald Gardner needed someone, and he thought it'd be funny to choose her because she was so respectable.
Oh, jeez. But certainly, I mean, we know about pagan religions. I mean, back during the Roman Empire, way before the coming of Christianity, there were pagans, there were Celts, there were Druids. I mean, this is true. This is historically accurate. But the link then was this guy, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
That sort of.
The thing is, we just don't know that much about the actual practice of any of those people because there's no written records.
Steels and things,
but we don't know how they were used. We have some clues, like so since I kind of got over this stage, I got fascinated with exactly this because I was like, well, if this isn't true, what is true? I want to learn about prehistoric religions, and it's really frustrating because there's really not that much evidence to go on, so a lot of it's speculation. But yeah, there's some long barrows and things which line up with the midwinter sun, and then Stonehenge is also aligned, so the sunrise at midsummer comes over the main. So there's some suggestion that maybe those two would have been important to them, which is cool because those are the ones, they're still in the Wiccan tradition, which is probably where Gardner got them from. But yeah, most of it is just a sort of mishmash, a collage, as I said, of all sorts of bits and bobs. Yeah.
Well, I had no idea. Man, this is an education, man.
Yeah.
I like this. Yeah.
And again, a charismatic leader that everybody's kind of magnetized to. There's a lot of similarities here. I think even you mentioned, Rebecca, that you, even after you didn't believe it anymore, you were still intrigued by it, and so you went back into studying it from a critical standpoint or objective. And I did the same thing. I mean, as an atheist, I went back to divinity school, to seminary, and got a master's in theological studies. Just because it was like, wait a second, I'm already embarrassed that I ever believed this. But, there's something to this. In fact, it's more just the anthropology of why humans do what we do. And it's complex. I think that last little section, like you said, you received an education. We humans, we take our woo-woo serious.
Yeah.
we make it complex.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this obviously within my discipline of Christianity. Good grief! I mean, we take Scripture and we parse it. There's whole volumes of books written over one little passage of Scripture.
Right.
Not only do we kind of invent something that is just superstition, but then we start attaching details to it, and it makes it more believable. Just like a good liar puts dates and times and names to his or her lies, which gives them credibility to the listener. Yeah, that's what we do. I think we beef it up. Anyway,
we're very creative people. Yes,
but I want to talk about back in the woods there, and sometimes. I mean, you didn't believe it for years or cling to it for years because it was just completely bunk. You felt
no, that's
something.
True. Yeah, I felt something very powerful.
Right. What do you think it is that when you're describing the whole thing that Bob asked you to take us into the woods there, take us into the coven, and you've got rituals, you've got candles, you've got singing, you've got dancing, you've got eating, drinking and being merry. I mean, that's a fun night.
Yeah, exactly. And it felt like family as well, which was beautiful. I felt a real connection with those people, and I'm still close with lots of those people.
Belonging.
Community. Yeah,
exactly. And also, I think I've always had, and I think this is a common thing, the way you get that sort of, shivery, weird, something strange and sacred about this place when I go into a beautiful place in nature. And I still get that when I'm out hiking.
Absolutely.
And things. I was thinking the other day, I was coming down from a long hike, and I was thinking, we spend our whole lives, or at least most of us do, in urban environments where everything is made for humans. Mm-hmm. But when you're out walking in nature, real nature, not just the scrubby fields around the towns where I live, but out in the middle of nowhere, you're made for this environment. Mm-hmm. You evolved to be in this environment. It's like a reversal of what you experience on your day-to-day. Instead of being in an environment made for man, you are man in an environment that you were made for. And I think
and
there's
made
something
from.
Yeah, something weird and beautiful. And so that feeling, that sort of stirring was really strong. And it felt like magic. I didn't have any other description for it. It felt sacred. It felt special.
Yeah.
And now I just think of it as a wonderful thing about being a human being, not some kind of indicator of any other kind of magic supernatural world. But that's what I was feeling.
Yeah. Well, I know that theists will say these very things.
Church. Yeah,
they'll say to me, if they're going to confront my atheism, they're going they're going to say something along the lines of, everything you just said as far as nature's way too beautiful. There's way too much purpose. The birds and the bees and the just the world, the plants, everything is just way too engineered. There's got to be something behind it. And all day long, I'll grant them that. This is what frustrates me is I'll tell you all day long that this is some magic shit we experience. How the fuck did we get here, and how does this work? And I'm breathing in and out. My eyelids are refreshing my eyes, and I'm talking to Bob across the table. And the fact that we started with single cell organisms or whatever, it is fucking magical. And it's amazing. And I'll grant a theist that all day long. Mm-hmm. Then what pisses me off is they don't see the giant fucking gap that they have to jump to now say, well, God's a male, God doesn't like pork, God doesn't like gays, God doesn't like... this is what I mean about the details. It's like after you've acknowledged that there's something mysterious going on, shut your fucking mouth.
Well, maybe it's
how do you really feel?
Maybe it's like we get hooked on it. So if you have that experience and you have it in a church, or like you're speaking in tongues, or you have that experience of something amazing and weird, and it makes you feel all funny, and you just keep going back to that same venue. So whether that's some circle in the woods or a church or wherever your sacred place is, a monastery, you go back there to get another hit of that good feeling.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't occur to you that as an atheist, you can just have that sitting in your garden if you see like a cool robin land on the fence.
Yeah.
Like that, it doesn't strike them that can be...
I think let's just say that maybe the top two reasons for these types of things are the feelings of connecting with the mysterious, with the magical, with the powerful, with the supernatural, transcendent, etc. Let's say that's number one. It may not be number one, but for now, number two is community. You feel connected. Now, those two things we still need as atheists and want. Mm-hmm. The third thing that I'm critiquing right here is the desire to bottle it, the desire to box it, the desire to define it and own it and hold it over people that don't have it, to use it as a way to feel superior, that God chose me and not you. I'm in heaven, you're in hell, to create us and them. If they'd stop at the first two, I want to have goosebumps and I want to have friends. Those are benign.
Yeah.
Those are benign, and everybody needs that. And I don't have any malice or energy around people that want to have friends and goosebumps.
Well, that's tribalism, isn't it?
Well, that's a benign version of tribalism.
Yeah.
Because I agree, Bob. I don't think tribalism in and of itself is evil.
Yeah.
It's when you use it to elevate your tribe over the next.
You're right. Right.
And that's that third step that I think theists and people that end up giving too much definition and meaning to their own version of their pattern seeking, immortality project.
And I think it debases the first two as well. Because you take something beautiful and true and wonderful about the world and turn it into this horrible little book that tells people to hate each other.
Yeah. Oh, you're dead on. That's where it gets toxic for sure. Well,
very interesting.
I think we're cool to move into the book, and I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a comic book, maybe as a small kid, but the whole graphic novel world is foreign to me. Mm-hmm. And so much so, and I think to Bob as well, we were talking on the porch beforehand, so much so that, is your book as unique as we think it is? Because we've never seen anything like this.
I've never seen anything like an atheist book, like a Superman comic book for atheists. Well, it's not that, but it's a graphic novel about atheism. So
it is and it isn't unique. So there are sort of several different schools of graphic novels. You've got like the American tradition, which is more like coming from superheroes and stuff, and it's a bit blam blam, and the art is very
pow.
Yes, exactly. The art is very structured and the storylines are fairly simple, although they're getting more, there's some variation in that. Yeah. Then you've got Japanese manga, which is very, has its own strange rules and stuff and is very cool, but it's quite similar to the American style in that there's a lot of kapow. And then there's the European tradition, which is much more like just novels with pictures. Mm-hmm. And exploring more sort of everyday or philosophical questions and ideas, but always in the sort of way of telling a story, like a novel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I've done isn't really that, but it comes out of that tradition. It's there's no superheroes. There's just people talking to each other and dealing with problems.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, in terms of, like there's Sam Harris, there's Hitch, there's others out there who write, books, nonfiction books about atheism and what have you. But I've never seen an atheist book with with graphic novel touch or technique. And I can't think of anybody out there you're in competition with.
Yeah, that I know of. I don't think there's anyone else who's done quite what I tried to do with this book. I'm appealing to a very niche market of people who atheists, or maybe not atheists, but people who are willing to read something that's obviously atheists, who are interested in philosophy and also like comic books.
Yeah,
That's
I
my
think
niche.
you're going to pick up a lot of young people, I think, with it. It'll be great. Yeah.
And I suspect, Rebecca, that you're I'm not saying that you're averse to it, but I don't consider this, quote unquote, an atheist book per se, any more than I consider it a non-unicorn book. It's not that it's anti-theist there is a little bit of that, but it's actually just vignette after vignette of human experience, people engaging each other with realities and human conditions that are difficult, and questions, and working through some very difficult things. And the fact that it's void of God is kind of, a secondary observation. It's not it's not the thrust of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually kind of originally, when I started thinking about it, I was thinking of it more as a polemic atheist book. But then I realized that I didn't really want to write or draw about that. I was much more interested in doubt. And especially since I'd gone through that experience of doubting these things that I was so sure about, and feeling not just in like an intellectual way of like unpicking the logic behind things, but how it feels to experience that sudden loss of certainty and, the strangeness of that. And because I talked to other people about this, and I knew that every human being, people from all over the world, had this experience of doubt and of reassessing, of wondering what to do next. I was like, well, that's the important thing. It's not the destination. The destination is kind of irrelevant. Like if you end up an atheist or an agnostic, or if you end up falling to another religion, it's not really the point. The point is that moment of doubt and what it does to us, and how it makes us human. I think it's just a really important thing.
Yeah, we should mention the title again. It's called Murmurs of Doubt by Rebecca Fox. Murmurs of Doubt. That's the name of the book. And it's a terrific work. Are you a trained artist by any chance?
No, well, yes and no. I actually studied English literature, but I was interested in art, and I was drawing as I went, so I kept that up. And then when I finished my MA in English literature, I was so exhausted with the whole world of literary analysis that I picked up my my paintbrush again and started getting back into art and went forward with that.
Nice job.
No, I'm not technically traditionally trained.
Yeah, that's good though.
Well, going back to what you just said about your intent with this book, and how I know I've mentioned something on Facebook this week. Every now and then I post some personal thing, and I was going through a thing where I realized that I had an illusion, and I got out of it, but now what? And then I was in disillusion, and I think the pitfall, and maybe this is at least what I heard you saying, is that instead of writing a book that was polemic atheist, you just wanted to focus more on doubt. And what I hear is I didn't want to focus on another form of certainty.
Yes.
Good point.
And this is what I mean by, maybe thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, the dialectic, is that, okay, I realized that I was delusioned, and now I'm disillusioned, but it's really just another illusion. And so somewhere in this middle, and this is why we always go back to get comfortable with mystery, get comfortable with not knowing, get comfortable with agnosticism. And so coming from a place of doubt and questioning and thinking, as opposed to just another version of fundamentalism or dogmatism or certainty.
Yeah, but it's a difficult, I agree completely that I think that is the best place to be, but it's a hard place to be, because I think we're so compelled to reach for the certainty and the comfort of that, and I find myself doing it all the time, to stay in a constantly like I don't know, I always think it's kind of like, they talk about buildings if you build a really tall building, it has to slightly be able to move, otherwise the wind will push it down.
Right. If it's too rigid.
Yeah, but rigidity is what, and we're always like almost fossilizing, like the idea you've had it long enough, it becomes part of your identity, and then it's hard and it becomes vulnerable again. And because it's too rigid and you have to just push it over. But that's hard work. I know it's the work of being a human being, but it's hard work.
You know, and I tell you, don't discount how adaptive we are. That's what I say. I mean, I think it's you get into what Aristotle, one of them said, how do you be a person of good character? Practice. So if you start practicing this notion of doubt, of, well, wait, let me think about that. Hold on. You know, if you get into that practice, I think you'll be much further ahead, you know. Don't you think?
Well, yeah, and I think maybe...
I mean, that's how I do it.
Well, it's built in.
Yeah.
You know, because practice is kind of the opposite of arrival. I think it's always been interesting the way that we talk about doctors. They practice medicine,
right,
as opposed to arrive at medicine.
Arrive at medicine.
Because we're still making it up as we go. That's the beauty of science. That's the beauty of honesty. Yeah. And I think, you know, man, Rebecca, when you threw down that word fossilized, my God, I got chills. What a great metaphor. I mean, because it's been around long enough to where, you know, we think it's now the thing that we're going to cling to. And I, you know, in every circumstance, and I think limbo is just, that's where the pain is. You know, I was listening to a book on like working out romantic, you know, love, relationship conflicts and tension and everything. And this psychiatrist was saying this, using the metaphor of the little flower, she loves me, she loves me not, she loves me, she loves me not. Right. And how if there's, it's really the in-between of not knowing if she loves me, you know, that is really painful. It's not knowing if there's a God, it's not knowing. And because we do migrate toward safe places. Certainty. Like if we're floating down the river, we're going to grab the next piece of driftwood that will give us some sense of certainty. It's just human nature.
I think like we were talking a bit about my childhood, and I was thinking about this idea. Have you heard of the theory of the secure base? It's like a theory in child psychology. It's basically children need some kind of solid base from which they can go out and encounter the world and then come back and they know that everyone's still there and everyone loves them and the world is knowable and safe, and then they go out and they come back and they go out and they come back, and that's how a child sort of learns to internalize that sense of security and safety, and is able to be experimental and doubt and question ideas because they know deep down that they have that security. If you grow up without a secure base, and this is just an idea from child psychology that I'm appropriating and taking over into the world of religion, which might not be appropriate, but if you grow up without a secure base, maybe you're less able, or it's harder to do that because you don't have the comfort of like, well, I can just lean on all this solid upbringing that I had. That's not there. There's nothing to lean on. So no wonder you grab for certainty, whether it's religion or any other ideology.
That's interesting because you would think the kids that were raised with very little base would get better at living without base. And then the people that do, I wonder, and just hearing you talk, Rebecca, my question was, isn't the plight? I mean, I'm 51. Bob, you're 63, 4?
6.
66?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're realizing that maybe nothing was base. There is no base. And, you know, obviously it's okay to create ones, especially ones that don't make you an asshole. And we have that need for it. But I don't know. It's a cynical position.
But kids who don't, know.
Well, yeah, we're talking about child psychology, but right. Is it the plight of the human experience and the adult maturation process to come to the conclusion that it was all a myth?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
That's scary, right? How old are you, Rebecca? You mind my asking?
I'm 34.
Okay. Well, let's get into the book because these vignettes are powerful, and I had 2 picked out that I wanted to talk about, and I've left one of them out on the porch, so I'm going to go out and get it, you jump into your notes with her. And I'll join you in a second.
Well, what I got when I was reading it, this is quite a struggle. I mean, it was a real struggle. My sense as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, this is a real struggle for Rebecca. She can't let things be. She demands to know what is, And then you've gone around the world literally to get the answers that will satisfy you in some way. And you speak, for those who don't really study such, like philosophical notions and stuff, but you speak of epistemology and you use an example of buying a car to sort of explain epistemological notions. Just for those listening, can you help us with that? What is this epistemology that you're talking about?
Well, epistemology is just like a fancy philosophy word for how we know what we know.
Yeah,
right.
So people could have different epistemologies. Someone could have an epistemology which is like, I know that something is true because it feels like it's true in my gut. That's my epistemology.
Sure.
I'd say that's
not a very good one, but
epistemology.
Yes.
But that's the one I worked with for a lot of my life.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a more secure, grounded epistemology would be something along the lines of, I know what I know because there is whatever evidence out there in the real world that's testable, and therefore I'm going to adopt that belief as provisional knowledge until I see other evidence to the contrary.
There you go.
So with atheism, that's basically why I'm an atheist and also an agnostic technically, is because there's no evidence for God. So as it stands, I don't believe he exists. But if new evidence comes up, I'm open.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, just give me something that I could test it, show me, and my mind is open.
I've come to realize that epistemology is like, having differing epistemologies with people is often the problem when you're trying to have a conversation with someone.
Totally,
You think you're disagreeing about something sort of, mundane, about like whether homeopathy works. Mm-hmm. But then when you dig down, you realize that's not at all, because when you say, I don't think homeopathy works, it's because there's no evidence that it works. Yeah. But when they say, I think homeopathy works, it's because they feel like it does.
Yeah.
So their knowledge, the way they define their knowledge, is different to the way you define your knowledge. Exactly. And you're talking at cross purposes, and you just go on forever, and it never gets
totally
anywhere.
Talking past each other.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a kind of refined, fancy pants word, but it's such a useful concept to just have in your wheelhouse to know, wait, actually, maybe we just have different epistemologies, and that's the problem.
Yeah, that is the problem.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, obviously, Anthony Magnabosco, our episode with him, street epistemology.
Right.
He's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, he's out on the street, and he's just basically saying 0 to 100%, how certain are you that this or that is true, and how do you base it? And he's drilling down. He's helping them see their own epistemology, which they've never examined. If they had, they wouldn't be where they are. And so he's just holding up a mirror saying, this is how you came to this belief, and how's that looking? How's that feeling? We're not feeling, actually. How's that holding water?
Yeah, exactly.
So the one of the stories is called Between Worlds, and I had
in the book. You mean?
In the book. These are little vignettes, and we talk a lot on this show about agency, the permission to make one's own choices and find one's own path.
Okay.
And this young Asian man with a girlfriend and a dog, fairly estranged from his family, and I think they're in two worlds, like they're Japanese Americans or American Japanese. Their citizenships in both countries or something, right?
Yeah.
And his father, who was fairly estranged and not really a very engaging person, kind of an asshole, he has passed away. Help me out here, Rebecca. Is the dead father in America and the young man is in Japan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's heading to the airport. Actually, he's at the airport. He's going to fly back home because he's been asked to read a eulogy or write a eulogy for his father, of whom he has almost no feelings toward. However, he's leaving behind his girlfriend and their dog, who has liver problems, probably going to die in the time that he's gone. And this is why I think Bob makes short films, Rebecca, like anything from a 10-minute film to a 30-minute film. But he's got a dozen of them out there on the web, and you can check them out. But these vignettes to me are like little short films, and the opening is him putting his keys in the plastic tub at security at the airport.
He's going back home,
and it says, that the moment you put your keys in this tub, you're forfeiting your agency or something. And then the whole thing takes place on the plane, where he's debating whether he wants to go or not, or he's regretting going, and he's in dialogue with the stewardess. And anyway, the twist at the end is that he decides not to go, And the whole scene on the plane was just, him envisioning making his decision. The last scene of this vignette is him not putting his keys in the tub and walking and going back home. And it just moved me, so powerfully in that there was an old song when I was a Christian by Steve Taylor about the possession of your car, the owner of the car, and Satan gets in the backseat of your car and he tries to take over your life. It's a horrible thing, but what I loved about it is that the driver of the car, after a 3-minute, because most songs are 3 minutes, after a 3-minute debate about who's going to run my life, Satan or me or God or whatever, he says, "Here's the keys. I'll be walking back to town." and I feel like, I didn't mean for the keys to be a metaphor here, or the thread in these two stories, but by not putting his keys in that plastic tub and saying, "Fuck it, I'm not going to my dad's funeral," that is a moment of powerful, pivotal, life-changing, two roads diverged in yellow wood moment. And it made all the difference when a person, and I know this is pertinent and poignant for post-Christians, is that part of why the hardness of why we never could bring ourselves to leave Christianity and why it was so hard is this moment. This moment where you take your keys and you put them back in your pocket, or whatever. You don't get on that plane. You make a decision for yourself for a change.
And it's for me, a lot of it was about deciding who is important to you and what is important to you in your life, not what you've told should be important to you.
Exactly.
So, especially because, and that's why that's why in the story he has to choose between being with his girlfriend and their dog or at his dad's funeral, because people would say, "Oh, but it's only a dog." But to him, it's not only a dog.
There you go.
And he wants to be with his family. That's his family, his dog and his partner, not at some funeral for a guy he didn't really know that well. And it's sad, and neither choice is perfect, both are flawed.
Sure.
But as you say, he's taking the agency for himself. He's making that decision.
Well, the way the book works is there's a story with illustrations, and then every one of them you write in prose a summary or maybe a touchstone of why you wrote that particular piece. And in this case, I'm going to read an excerpt from this Between Worlds Agency story. We are all born into a relationship with parents and with a country. From our first moments, most of us have a family name and a nationality that will define us. Even if we change them both for the rest of our lives, it'll define us for the rest of our lives. Our culture, traditions, and religions encourage us to prioritize these unchosen relationships to ensure social harmony and solidarity. The urge to label each other and ourselves seems inescapable. The very nature of language is a sophisticated labeling system that allows us to communicate complex or ephemeral ideas. But from the vantage point of 10,000 feet above ground, which is the story's all about a flight, it seems strange that the arbitrary categories that we are born into are prioritized over those we choose. That we are encouraged to value most highly the relationships we fall into by an accident of birth rather than those we build ourselves based on mutual values, interests, and respect.
That's my life philosophy.
Yeah.
In a couple of sentences, I feel really passionately about the people who I've built I have a very close handful of friends, and I value our friendship so deeply above anything in the world. Yeah, I think it's important that we give ourselves, again, this word keeps coming up, but it's about empowering yourself to choose what you need and what you want and who you care about. It's really, really important. And it's something that for people who grew up religious and even people who didn't, is not encouraged in our society.
Yeah. Well, when you said of the two choices that your fictional character had to go do his dad's funeral or to stay home with his dying dog, I mean, neither of them are perfect. It's never so crystal clear. I know which one to choose. No, the point is it's a tension and a confusion. And I know I know that another thing that makes this imperfect and confusing is that when a person, say they move away from their family, they may even move away from their country, and they're finding and redefining their new self and their new set of friends. In fact, there's a fridge magnet on our fridge that one of our mutual friends, Bob, gave us, and it said, "Friends are the family we get to choose." And Mindy and I, we've moved 800 miles away from where we were raised, and we have built a new life with a new set of friends and, if you will, family. And sometimes those friendships are succeeding or thriving, and sometimes we're feeling lonely, or and guess what happens when the new life that we've built for ourselves begins to fail? What do we want to do?
You start thinking about going back.
Yep. You want to go back to Oklahoma. You want to go back to the, because that was at least a sure thing. And so this pilgrimage of building one's own life and finding one's own path is fits and starts, man. It's wax and wane. It's ebb and flow. It's yin and yang. It's a tough journey.
Yeah, it really is. I felt it. I've lived in a few different places, and my husband is originally from South Africa, so he feels it quite deeply as well. Like that feeling of like not really knowing quite where you belong and having to reestablish like a network and a community everywhere you go, and how that is really valuable and important skill to be able to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, because people move around so much, you're unlikely to stay in the same town that you grew up in.
And loneliness is the common thread in human condition. I mean, we're all lonely.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. You talk in the book. You talk about that Cape Town, South Africa, and how South African natives in Nigeria. I believe there's a great fear of albinism.
Yeah.
And how HIV/AIDS and embracing Western culture is not a good thing. They deny that. They deny HIV/AIDS and some, not all, embracing Western culture. Many have been hurt and not following the notions of critical thinking by embracing all sorts of strange things like totemism and boogeymen. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, they have a huge problem, particularly with AIDS denialism. Last time I was in South Africa, which was last year, whilst we were there, a friend of mine was diagnosed with HIV here in the UK, and it really made me realise how, and this is obviously no one's lucky to get HIV, but you are lucky to get HIV here compared to getting it in South Africa, because the previous president South Africa was an AIDS denialist, and he didn't allow people to have access to the drugs that they needed, to antiretroviral drugs, and he denied access of charitable organizations who wanted to come and give out antiretroviral drugs to help people, and they still have a massive legacy of that. And there's a lot of, and it's interesting actually, because the AIDS denialism doesn't come from South Africa or Africa originally. Well, people think that it comes from Western bloggers writing about how this is all rubbish, and then at some point this guy, Mbeki, the previous president of South Africa, picked it up and started thinking that and being convinced by these Western pseudoscientific ideas, and he passed it on to his populace. So yeah, so they have that. They deny certain diseases. They have a lot of strange cures, which are much more traditional African, witch doctor-y type cures and medicines, which don't really work. But when you don't have access to real medicine, that's all you've got. So that's what people have. But the problem at the moment that they have is that there is real medicine to treat a lot of the problems that they're suffering from, but because they don't have enough money, and because there's this resistance to Western medicine, it doesn't get to the people who really need it. Wow. So it's really, really sad to see, especially when you're coming from, a country like the UK, where we're lucky enough to be able to. My friend is on antiretrovirals provided by the NHS.
Right.
That's amazing. You go to South Africa, and people either don't believe in antiretrovirals, don't know what they are, or don't have access to them. It just hit me particularly then, because I had that experience of seeing this people going through the same problems in completely different situations. So yeah, it's really upsetting to me thinking about the current situation in South Africa, but it's all across Africa. I'm more familiar with South Africa because that's where my husband's from.
Sure.
But I saw the same thing in Kenya and in parts of Northern Africa as well. And there's this amazing Nigerian advocate, Leo Igwe, who talks about this. Who, if anyone is interested in learning more about these issues, this is the guy to search out. He wrote a skeptical manifesto for Africa, and he is a humanist activist who goes and tries to spread rationality in science all across Africa with a focus on Nigeria.
What's the name again of the fellow?
Leo Igwe. If you look for a skeptical manifesto for Africa, you'll find it.
Manifesto for Africa. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole notion of alternative medicine, you talk about that, and how middle-class folks, especially in the West now, have sort of embraced this strange stuff, yoga, spiritual practices, health foods, what else? Sort of a weird soup of supernatural ideas, ideas that still are, that sort of disregard Western notions of rationalism, I guess. Is that good or bad? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think I understand why people do it completely. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And it's from basically poor critical thinking skills, ignorance of science, and wishful thinking, which are three things that I'm very familiar with.
Been there, done that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not very scientific literate still. I can't even say the word. And my critical thinking skills are better now, but still not perfect. And I've got plenty of wishful thinking, so I completely get. And also, confusingly, some herbal remedies do work. So there's like that thrown into the mix to make it even more difficult for people to actually figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of packet of ideas, which is sort of a loose, I guess you could call it alternative medicine, but it extends to sort of some kind of spiritual ideas and stuff. I think it's almost like a product of the fact that we have been really successful with Western medicine, and now people think that you should be able to treat everything. So if you have any kind of problem, any kind of ache or pain, and Western medicine can't cure it, well, that's not because it's just one of those weird things that happens. That's because Western medicine can't cure it, but some other medicine can. So you just keep on going, searching and spending money and being, investing your time and energy in all these weird cures to try and get to because you believe that there is something out there that can sort you out, when sadly, in many cases, there isn't. It's chronic pain, or it's something that there just isn't a cure for, or it's just one of those things that happens to your body as you age. It's just... Yeah, and that's a hard thing to sit with and accept. So people will go on the quest to find the next cure. And there are many people who think that they have the next cure and are very excited and passionate and want to help people. And then there are also many charlatans who will make you spend money on snake oil, which is disgusting, and will tell you not to go to Western medicines, and will encourage you to try their crazy cures instead of actually getting chemotherapy or whatever treatment you actually need, which makes me very angry and upset. But yeah. So it's understandable, but very frustrating.
Right.
Yeah. That's my feeling on it.
Well, and we've just highlighted two places on the spectrum of, for lack of a better word, stupidity, or at least fear and denial. Yeah. And that is, one, denying that I have AIDS, or I have HIV. Just complete head in the sand. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. La 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 la.
Yeah.
This is the no saying that I talk about. And then the next on the spectrum is, okay, yeah, I have the disease, but I'm going to try this other stuff or whatever,
Yeah.
So one of the hardest subjects known to man is death and dying.
Yes.
And I think the very next story after the Between Worlds is one called Dying of the Light. And there's an elderly woman in a hospital bed, and she's dying. Her daughter is around. Her granddaughter is around. There's nurses around, and she's coming in and out of consciousness. And she's believed at times, maybe various narratives, that there's more, that you're going to live, can be in heaven, or you're going to be reincarnated. But as she's laying there dying, she's starting to kind of realize those don't hold water in these moments, where it's just unconsciousness is lurking around the corner, and to go, fully fade to black is pretty daunting and or comforting, I guess. I mean, depends on where you're at. Yeah. But everybody's coming around and trying to, like, the mother So you get 3 generations. The grandmother's in the bed dying, her daughter, and then the granddaughter. And the granddaughter is actually kind of feelings of grieving about this, what's about to happen. The mother is trying to say, don't cry, stay cheerful. We need to celebrate her life and not focus on this darkness. And so there's, there's a lot of theories going around about how we should feel about death. And then at the last, I guess he's a nurse or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he comes in and he just acknowledges her feelings. I'm afraid. Of course you are. I think, I'm going to die. He said, yes, you are. I mean, he was just a yes-sayer and held her in the moment, brought her to the moment. He invited her to sit up and look outside because these starlings, these birds are flying around. And this is the moment that's presenting itself. And we can put ourselves in the future. We can put ourselves in the past. But this is what's happening right now. You're still alive right now. So let's do this. Mm-hmm. And it was just a really, really beautiful
Very
piece.
sweet.
Again, I was almost moved to tears. I've got Andre Pacelli going in the background.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that piece, the one called Dying of Delight?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to find a way to comfort people without making up bullshit. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you comfort someone when they're going to die and you, as an atheist, believe that will be that? Mm-hmm. And I think this is the strong temptation to imagine there will be something else. But as soon as you start imagining making up stories saying, oh, maybe you'll meet up with your loved ones in heaven, or maybe you'll be reincarnated, or whatever the story is you're telling, you deny that person that moment of actually being there and experiencing the only chance they have at life. Mm-hmm. I just think that's so, so sad. Yeah. And I think a lot of people who are in Ada's situation, the elderly woman's situation, they feel incredibly lonely because no one is acknowledging their experience. Mm-hmm. And you don't necessarily want answers, at least from the people I've spoken to, don't want answers. They don't want to be preached to. They don't want to be told what's going to happen. They just want to be heard and to have their feelings acknowledged and validated as being real and important. And that should be a simple thing to do. But of course it's not simple. It's incredibly difficult because if we face the reality of their mortality, we have to face the reality of our own mortality, which no one wants to do. Yeah. So it's much easier just to pretend to be cheerful. And there's a moment in that story where a lady comes in to paint Ada's nails. Mm-hmm. And that's something that someone did for my grandma when she was in hospital towards the end of her life. And I just thought the irony of her spending time with this woman painting her nails to make them look just so. Mm-hmm. And it was such a strange impulse and a beautiful impulse because it's a way of caring and it's a way of being intimate and touching my grandma when she probably wasn't being touched very often in that way, apart from by doctors and stuff. But to be, to have like nice moisturizer massaged into your hands, I think that's a lovely idea. But it's kind of, for me, it represented the irony of how, let's not talk about this, just put another coat of shellac on those nails.
Yeah. That's interesting because we're talking about an act, the act of painting her nails, that could be seen both as like putting lipstick on a pig, this is a waste of time, or this is, you're still here. Yeah. Let's paint these nails. And it has everything to do with the attitude and the perspective of the actor. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's weird because it's both. There's something kind of beautiful and sad and touching and weird about it.
Yeah.
And my grandma died when I was 2. I wasn't quite in the phase of having these thoughts, so I didn't get the chance to ask her about how she felt about that incident or how she felt about dying, which is something I really regret because I would have liked to have been the person who could have had those conversations with her. But yeah, and I've spoken to other people who are not dying but facing mortality in various ways, and I've spoken to my friends who have been with their parents or grandparents when they've died, and it's very similar things. Like people are really keen to whitewash death at the expense of the person who's dying.
Yeah. Well, you in your closing comments, like you make reference to something that I'm suspicious of. Are you familiar with Ernest Becker and Denial of Death?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's my Bible, and so I recognize that you were in awareness of him. But you point out something that's fascinating. You say A study of terminally ill cancer patients published in the Journal of the American Medical Association came with some results that were counterintuitive to us thinking that these grand narratives of afterlife would be comforting. A faith in the afterlife is often thought to comfort the dying. Some writers have theorized that religion itself is a product of humanity's desperate desire to deny death.
And that would be Ernest Becker.
Yeah, that was when I knew you'd read Becker. But also, Bill Maher starts his documentary Religulous, voicing this common sentiment. Quote, "These questions about what happens when you die, they so freak people out that they will just make up any sort of story and cling to it." Unquote. So you might expect to find religious people more relaxed and optimistic on their deathbeds than atheists or agnostics. But the study found that patients who reported relying on their religion to cope with their illness were more likely to pursue aggressive medical interventions in the last days of their lives. They were not resigned to or welcoming of death, but in fact fighting it. If religion is a strategy to avoid or deny the reality of death, it seems to be a pretty flawed one. And here's the tension, because you go on to quote the famous quote from Dylan Thomas, "Do not go gentle into the night, into that good night. Yeah. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." And Rebecca, you write, "I'm not sure if the rage still resonates with me, but the passion does." So I hope that my last few days are spent wringing every last drop of experience out of my consciousness. Because if we accept that death is real, then the only response is to live, even when our bodies are deteriorating right up to the edge of our existence. So here again is this tension of like carpe diem as a panic, or paint your fingernails as a panic, or paint them as a relaxed. I mean, is how we're doing this mature or immature? And this is why I think that sometimes the very same act, because in a way, if we're criticizing these religionists as pursuing more medical solutions, trying to stay alive, we can say that, yeah, if heaven's so fucking great, why are you trying to avoid it? I mean, we can say that. Or we can say maybe, if we're gonna use Dylan Thomas's quote to rage, then the fact that they're seeking more medical solutions to stay alive, we could praise that.
Yeah, it's true. It's a weird study that can be interpreted many ways.
Yeah.
I think what came to me when I read it originally was maybe these people who have had, beliefs and faith their whole lives, at the moment where they're actually on the brink of death, start to feel a little less sure. And because they haven't had their whole lifetime of like dealing with the fact there is no God, maybe it hits them really hard in the last couple of days of their life and they don't have anyone to talk about it, and that would lead them to panic and do strange things. But that's just completely my interpretation. I've just thrown that on the data. But I would and this is partly drawn from anecdotes from people I know whose family members who've had confessed to them in the last few days of their lives that they weren't so sure about the religion. Because I think as atheists, we're often the people that people turn to when they're like, "Oh, I'm not really sure about this, and I can't tell anyone else." But because you have already expressed that you're an atheist, I feel comfortable telling you about it. Yeah. So maybe we hear these sort of stories more often, which could skew my perceptions of the world. But that idea of like, "Oh, I just need one more day." You're right. It's either something beautiful, I just need one more day to live my life because life is all we have and let's go for it, or I just need one more day because I'm so frightened of the blackness that I can't face it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Death and dying. I mean, and so we're going to go like we do every show. We're going to go from heavy to light because we want to wrap up before we finish up. Get a little bit of just the light human side of Rebecca Fox. So what are some of your hobbies, or what do you do for fun?
Well, I still love hiking and being out in nature. That's like my favorite thing to do in the world. And because of my obsession with researching anything to do with Wicca, I spend a lot of time going around to like Neolithic monuments and anything like that. I'm fascinated. Long barrows, stone circles. I just spent a it was mine and my husband's wedding anniversary, and we went up to Orkney, which is this beautiful collection of islands right at the top of the north of Scotland, and they have so many ancient ruins there. It's spectacular, and you can hike for hours and find this strange, weird, lonely stone circle and spend time there, and it's a really magical, in inverted commas, place.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite thing to do with my time. And then all the normal things of like watching Netflix when my feet are tired from hiking.
What are you attracted to on Netflix?
Well, actually, what I'm watching, just started watching last night based on your guys' recommendation, or one of you, I can't remember who it was, is that thing with the guy from Breaking Bad, The Path.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I just watched the first episode, so don't spoil anything.
Yeah.
Okay,
But I heard you mention it on a previous podcast. It was like on my list of things I had to watch. I love that. Yeah, really good.
Oh, there's a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, that one pulled me in, and it was pretty hard too. Like it's
tough.
But part of entertainment, part of the reason why some of us get on a roller coaster is that we want to feel afraid or nervous. We want to bite our nails every now and then. I mean, it's okay. There's this tension that's created, and
It's still safe, though.
yeah, you're still safe.
Yeah.
We're sitting in our living room watching Netflix, and I'm not in a cult, but I can get pulled in. I mean, I did, even speaking of Breaking Bad. I mean, you talk about a nail biter. You know, there was just
I love Breaking Bad.
right. It was just, and so why do we do this to ourselves? Well, maybe to feel alive. Who knows?
We love stories. We can't get enough of them.
But
Oh, and I should
Insatiable.
probably confess I'm a bit of a massive Trekkie as well.
okay.
Oh, a Trekkie, or a Trekker, as they'd call them here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I love all
fascinating.
that. Again, it's the same thing. It's like, it's fun, but also they're exploring philosophical issues. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And there's aliens, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Tons of metaphors in Star Trek. There's just there's no end to what you can pull out of some of these.
Yeah,
and this is why fiction is often more pedagogical than nonfiction.
Yeah, look
Because
at the Bible.
yeah.
Well, that should be in the
I'd
nonfiction
rather not
section
look
right
at the
there.
Bible,
But
Bob.
okay, I hear you.
But when the teacher becomes the student, or the student becomes their own teacher, that's what fiction empowers you to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone leading you into truth, you're finding it, and that's there's a whole lot more ownership.
Yeah,
after
very
that.
postmodern actually. When you
Yeah.
start thinking about it, it doesn't really matter what the story's about. It's what you're making meaning.
Yeah.
So,
So, Rebecca, do you have a vice that you'd be willing to confess on the air?
a
Oh,
vice.
God, so many. But not many I'm willing to confess. No, I don't know if I have any vices. I don't do anything that I consider a vice, really.
Well, do you have a poison of choice?
Yeah, I drink. Not too much anymore. I kind of cut back on that a lot. I really like red wine.
Okay.
That's my choice.
That's good for you. It's medicinal. That's what I
Yes,
always
exactly.
say. Yeah.
And I smoke weed, but I don't smoke anything else. No tobacco, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
But,
Thank you very. That's funny.
Where I live is perfect because there's like a beautiful big stony beach, so you can just go down onto the beach, and it's such a kind of hippie liberal town that you go down in the evenings, everyone's brought their own little barbecue and sitting out there having a drink, having a chat, playing music, smoking a bit. It's a really nice place to be. So whenever you come next to the UK, you should pop on down.
Wow.
Well, where can people get your book, see your artwork, maybe even dialogue with you?
You'll find everything related to the book at doubtcomic.com.
Okay, doubtcomic.com.
Yes.
Doubt comic or comics?
Just comic.
Doubtcomic.com.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
that'll link you, show you where to buy the book, and also link you to my personal website where you can find contact detail for me and the other arty stuff I do, and everything. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, and just to stimulate everybody's curiosities, or at least the perverts out there like myself, is that you do a lot of nudes.
Yeah, that's mainly what I do, life drawing. It's a good practice. I mean, for drawing the human body is the best way to practice as an artist, I think. And also it's fun because you get to draw naked ladies, so I mainly do ladies.
Well, I saw a man the other day.
Yeah.
But because I follow you on Instagram.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
The thing about your lack of religious upbringing, you probably didn't have a whole lot of body shaming to get over, or did you?
Not in the traditional, your genitals are evil or anything like that. But my mum was very critical of my weight, so I have that. I mean, that's true of pretty much every woman in the Western world, but I have hang-ups about that stuff. And doing the life drawing and painting and drawing nude women has been amazing for that. Because you see these women and they're beautiful and amazing, and they're sort of beyond these weird concepts we have of what's good looking and what's not good looking, or what's, like that all seems irrelevant when you're actually with a person, this beautiful, fleshy person in front of you. Yeah. So, yeah, I love life drawing. I'm really passionate about it. It's one of the times I'm happiest is when I'm just there with a pencil and a naked person.
Yeah.
Well,
let me quote you on that. That's funny. That's funny.
Thanks so much for coming on. Awesome. The website again is Doubt, DOUBT comic.com.
Right. And we will connect that. We'll put that on our link on our page so that, people can get in touch with you and find the book. Awesome. It's highly recommended. Highly recommended. Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah, it was great. It's called Murmurs of Doubt.
Now, I printed it off on PDF because your publicist sent me a link, but it's in hard copy, right? I mean,
yeah. You didn't get the best experience.
I know.
I think I'm afraid.
No.
He sent it to you before it was actually a physical object.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I want to get one for my. Is it a coffee table size book? I mean, is it?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between like a normal size book and a coffee size table size book.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Well, and I'm sorry that we are a non-visual media, because otherwise we'd be showing your work and showing clips of this, but people have to go out to doubtcomic.com and see it for themselves.
Yeah, grab it.
Yeah, there are sample pages there and stuff, so they can get an idea of the sort of style I draw in.
Yeah,
super.
So, Rebecca, you feel good about our talk? You have anything you want to put a bow on?
I feel great about our talk. Yeah, it was really nice to talk to you guys. You're lovely people. But I wish I'd listen to you talk more, because I feel like I spent most of the time talking.
No. You're the guest, man. You're the one.
We did our share. Key. And I regret that you were in Nashville last month or something, and we weren't friends at that time, or we would have literally had a beer.
Well, maybe I might have to go. Well, my husband might not have to go back, and I might be able to, sneak on his plane ticket or something.
Well, just let us know.
In the area.
Yeah,
that would be wonderful.
All right.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Wonderful, wonderful talking to you, dear.
Yeah, it's been really good talking to you guys too.
So that's our talk with Rebecca Fox, calling from England. I love her. Her personality, her way of communicating, it doesn't hurt that she's got this lovely British accent. We learned a lot about the Wiccan belief and its geographical variations. We all love Bob. We love his naive perspective, and we can see in a very innocent way how a lack of understanding can be the source of judgment. Bob was not at all judgmental of Rebecca, but you can see his impatience or intolerance, if you will, of woo-woo beliefs. One of David Rico's declarations of healthy adulthood is, "Until I see another's behavior with compassion, I have not understood it." And that's what we try to do here, both Bob and I. Listen, all fear and judgment of another human being is only afforded to those who have not experienced that person's life. We've not walked a mile in their shoes. In fact, we've probably not walked an inch. And if we had, and I mean this of Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer, etc., we would have a much better understanding of why they did what they did. We might even be able to say that we would do the same thing under the same circumstances. And by circumstances, I mean their mental health, their brain, their childhood, their history, their entire context. So I just want to keep erecting this beautiful standard of connectedness and seeing ourselves in everyone else. I have found that this naturally and with very little effort on my part makes me a better person, makes me wiser and kinder and more empathetic just by saying, "No wonder," or, "Oh, that's why they're like that." If you want to be less of an asshole, then grow compassion, grow in understanding of another person's battles, because they're fighting it. I mean, you could say that nobody does evil in their own eyes. Everybody's doing the best they can with what they've got. I mean, even a psychopath This is the lens through which they see the world. They have no empathy. And I just can't help but think that this need to elevate ourselves above others is our own insecurity. Just join the human race. Anyway, our friend and former guest of this podcast, Chris Nelson, episode 101, posted this week on Facebook a phrase that I want to share. Quote, "Every encounter with another human being is like being able to read a half page from the middle of a novel and then someone grabs the book away." Unquote. This both applies to what I just talked about, connectedness, but it also applies to this show. And that's how I feel about every guest we've ever had on, is that we get a little glimpse into their life. Getting this little glimpse of Rebecca Fox, for example, lets us peer into her life, her novel that's being written and has been written and will be continued to be written every day of her life. This human experience is amazing. Could we not say? Could we not agree? And as naturalists, it's amazing. Just consciousness itself. Before we were born, we couldn't engage with each other. We couldn't see, smell, feel, orgasm, eat, create some kind of art, listen to music, dance, or play with friends. Someday, all this will end for each of us. And while some of us, like Rebecca and myself, not Bob, tried to find extra meaning and magic and supernatural imaginations in this thing we call life, we're now finding that even as those things prove to be false, the truth of our existence, our reality, and our relationships are more than enough for striking awe in us, for creating magic and wonder without needing to delude or lie to ourselves. In fact, we're learning to jump in to life rather than escape from it. We're learning to say yes. My thanks to Bob, as always. Thanks to Rebecca. It was a good show. We'll see you next week. Love you.